We're back out here at the Big Lake once again, and today we're talking about why when you see bass busting up on shad, it doesn't always mean what you think it means. Stick around, you don't want to miss this one. There we go, I got that one. And here is this video's featured comment. Congratulations! If you would like to have a chance to have your comment featured in an upcoming video, all you've got to do is leave a comment. And now, on with the video. Welcome back to Lowbrow Fishing, and if you were here for the last video, you know that I touched on the topic of bass busting on bait fish, right? We always hear the term busting up on shad. Even in the northern part of the country where there isn't any shad, right? Northern Illinois, northern Indiana. That's usually about the line, from what I can tell, of where the shad population dies off, and then you start to get into more things like, alewife, goby, things like that in those northern areas. But down south, especially down here in South Mississippi, shad is king. Shad and shiners. That is what those bass are eating. That and sunfish, right? Every single lake, it seems, doesn't matter if it's northern Minnesota, southern Canada, all the way down to South Florida, there's going to be a population of sunfish, whether it's bluegill, shellcracker, long ear, pumpkin seed. There's so many different types, and they all look very much the same. We hear the blanket term, right? Brim. Here in the South especially, brim. But a lot of times, that's what those bass are feeding on. Those bass are feeding up on those bluegill. That's why when we see bass busting up, what's the first thing we do? Well, we tie on a topwater. Well, it's white, it's silver, it's a shad impersonator. It's something that we can do to try to mimic a shad, right? I mean, I know for myself right here, these guys right here, this is one of my favorite ways to impersonate or mimic shad, and that's with a caffeine shad. It's in the name. A Zoom Super Fluke, any type of soft plastic jerkbait. It's what it's made to do, right? For the most part, that's predominantly what those are going to do. But a lot of times, we swing and a miss. We cast and we scratch our heads going, why can't we get a bite? Well, in the last video, I touched on it a little bit. In this video, we're going to do a little bit more of a deep dive. What it is exactly that I'm doing, because once I figured out that those bass were busting up on bluegill and shellcracker and long ear sunfish, which is what we have here in this lake, once I figured out that that was happening, it changed my entire process. It changed exactly what I was doing. See, first of all, we've got to think about, why are those bass busting up? Well, obviously they're coming from underneath up to the surface to strike at whatever it is that they're feeding on, whatever form of bait fish that they're feeding on. They're swimming at them and they've got their mouth open and they're hitting them hard. But the key is they're coming from underneath, which generally means that those bass are low in the water column looking up. And that's how we have to think about it when we're fishing. Remember, as we've said before, in the summertime especially, that strike zone, that area that those bass are willing to go for bait, usually it's very small, but under the right circumstances, we can get them to expand that, and taking advantage of the chasing instinct of those bluegill is one way that we can do it. Now, how do we do that? Well, first of all, we're going to mimic what it is that they're feeding, not just in the colors, but we have to mimic how a bluegill swims, how a bluegill acts. You've got to take a piece of plastic and metal and convince a bass that that is a bluegill or other type of sunfish. Once you do that, then that's the biggest part of the battle, to entice that bass into striking your lure, into biting your bait. Got him. That's not bad. That one's not bad. Oh. Oh no. Ah, son of a gun.
Well, phooey.
Now, one of the best ways I found to do that here recently is with this guy. This is a 3/4 ounce, or it might be a 1 ounce swim bait. This is an H2O Express. It's just a bluegill sunfish impersonator. Actually, I think this is a long ear sunfish because it's got that long black streak there, and it's kind of got a more orange color to it, and that's usually indicative of a long ear sunfish. But either way, we've got those in this lake, and it works as a good bluegill impersonator, imitator, and it also works as a good pumpkin seed shell cracker, whatever. It's got that profile. In the water, the way this thing swims is so very realistic. It's eerily realistic. If you didn't know that this thing was on a string, you would honestly think it's a real fish. So I take advantage of how I'm using that in the water. I'll cast this out and I'll let it sink down. This is a very fast sinking bait. So I'll let it sink down, not quite to the bottom, and I reel it back very, very slowly. And when I do that, it looks just like a bluegill or a sunfish just meandering along nice and slow. I give a good couple of cranks every once in a while to give it that real quick rip, that startled rip. And when I do that, a lot of times that's when I'm getting my bites. So again, step one, let's find out what it is the bass are busting on. We know that it's a bluegill. Step two, let's imitate that bluegill to entice those bass.
There we go, I got that one. Come here, you. So that is the deal. That's a little bit better one right there. Ooh, barely had him, but I got him. Pound and a half, pound and 3/4. Not a bad little bass. Not a bad little bass at all. And he was, in the shade. Alright, beautiful little bass. Thank you. Thank you for playing. We sure do appreciate that. Thank you. On to the next one.
Now, sometimes I'm going to be wanting to go all the way down to the bottom, right? I want to drag the bottom. And when I'm doing that, I'm using a jig. And here we've got a Guggen jig, but you can see, obviously, this is a bluegill type of color. I've got a Rage Crawl as my trailer, and this is what I'm using whenever I'm fishing all the way down, whenever I'm dragging the bottom. And that's another effective way, especially if those bass are really being stubborn. I use it in combination. I will use that swim bait, cast it out there, and I can sometimes get 3 or 4 bass to bite that, whenever they're active. And when that dies off, then I come back behind it with that jig and I start slow dragging that bottom. And I can generally pick off 1 or 2 more fish. And those are not the only types of presentations, right? I mean, a spinner bait, slow rolling the spinner bait, giving a couple of cranks is really good. You know that in the past couple of videos, I've talked about using the jackhammer stealth, a chatterbait, a bladed jig, something along those lines in those green and orange types of colors. Something that is really indicative, again, of a sunfish. And I have been able to really improve the bites, right? So you come out to the lake during the summer and it's a drag, right? Fishing is already hard enough. So whenever we can find something, a technique or a presentation or a pattern, which is what this is, that can really elevate and give us an advantage whenever we're fishing, then that's something that we really should consider taking advantage of, which is why I decided I was going to pick this apart. And it's really paid great dividends for me. It's something that I suggest that you do too. Look at what those bass are feeding on, and I guarantee you'll probably be surprised. A lot of times it's going to be sunfish, and if it's a lake in North America, the United States especially, I bet it's going to have a type of sunfish in it. So that's going to give you a ready-made population of bait fish that you can easily imitate. There's so many things that you can do to mimic, not just bluegill, but also other types of sunfish. And I'm telling you, those bass right now are really keyed off on those types of fish. In some areas, you've still got the bluegill spawn going on, right? So you're finding bluegill beds. Now, in my lake, the bluegill spawn is done. It's been done for months because it is just so warm. I mean, it's 140 degrees out here right now, but I'm still out here fishing, and I was able to have a pretty good day today because I found out what those bass are keying off on. Came out kind of early this morning. Actually got to the lake a little bit later than I wanted to. Got out here about 8:30 and been out here fishing ever since. And we've actually caught some really nice bass. Did most of the damage on that swim bait and followed it up with a jig. Caught a couple again with the chatterbait with the jackhammer stealth, and you know I don't know how long this pattern's going to hold out, but I know for the next foreseeable future, that's what those bass are keyed in on. So I'm thinking that they're going to be running this probably until August or so. So we're going to see, we're going to keep an eye on it. But if you're seeing bass busting up on your waters right now, I bet you it's sunfish. So take advantage of that, imitate those baits, and watch what happens. So there you have it. The next time you see bass busting up, I bet you they're busting up on some type of sunfish. And you can use that to your advantage because if that's the prey species that the bass are after, then that's the prey species you need to imitate. And I guarantee you, you'll get not just more bites, but better quality bites. Thanks for watching Lowbrow Fishing. We'll catch you in the next one.